Hi everyone, I'm Amanda Kendall, and while I usually speak in person at City of Joondalup Libraries, right now we're doing things a little bit differently. The coronavirus pandemic has affected everyone in many different ways, and one group of people it's affected has been travel writers. They're the first to admit that being unable to travel is a privileged problem to have, but when you make your living by travelling most of the year, it is actually a problem. The silver lining of that is that for once, these grounded travel writers have time to talk to us, so we've put together the Grounded Travel Writer series. Today, I'm speaking with Catherine Marshall. Catherine is a journalist and travel writer originally from South Africa and now living in Sydney. She's one of Australia's most awarded travel writers and is usually very hard to pin down while she explores the globe, so we're lucky to chat with her today. So, Catherine, welcome to the Grounded Travel Writer series.
Thank you, Amanda. It's lovely to be with you.
Awesome. So let's get started. I'd like to hear a bit more about where you are now and how you're coping with being grounded.
Well, as you said, I'm in Sydney. I'm sitting at home. I have one dog on my lap and another one nearby. So I'm very much living the homely life at the moment, and I'm coping quite well with being grounded. I'd actually originally voluntarily grounded myself for the first quarter of this year, just to take a breath and to catch up on some work. And so I have been quite enjoying the extension of that grounding, and enjoying the things that one doesn't really get to enjoy as a travel writer, spinning around the world. Things such as, gardening and reading and all those typical things. I've actually been quite enjoying the change of seasons. It's winter's sort of creeping in, and I've almost noticed the tilting of the earth away from the sun. So each morning I walk out into the garden and I notice how the light is in a slightly different place every morning. So it's been quite enjoyable being able to appreciate those things that we don't normally get to appreciate when we're on the road. And I've been doing a lot of reading and reading about travel. So that's been keeping me busy too.
It's a semi-decent substitute, I suppose, for actually being out there.
Yeah, armchair travel.
Yeah. I think it's a good way to go, especially right now.
Sure.
Reflecting on some of your past travels, can you tell us about one of your most memorable travel moments?
Well, yes, and I think actually being at home also allows one to do that, to reflect on one's travels. As travel writers, we don't often get that opportunity. We don't have much time in between trips. But one of my most memorable travel moments was traveling to the Republic of Congo, or Congo Brazzaville, as it's also known. And this was a trip that was really around 8 years in the making. Was something I'd dreamed about for a long time. The place that I stayed at hadn't even been built when I first started thinking about it. I was traveling to a place called Odzala Kakua National Park in the far north of Congo Brazzaville. It's a part of the Congo basin and that vast green belt, almost an impenetrable green belt. That's been, written about in books like Conrad's Heart of Darkness and Barbara Kingsolver's The Poisonwood Bible. So this place had really been conjured in my imagination, and it was being opened up to tourists. Of course, it's still very much off the beaten track, but it's home to a group of western lowland gorillas. These are endangered creatures. They'd been almost decimated by Ebola in the beginning of the thousands. And there is a primatologist from Spain who's been working there for close on 25 years, researching these animals and habituating them. So we actually got to, when I was there, I got to go on 2 treks, tracking these gorillas, and on both occasions, we actually saw them. Wow. And got to spend an hour with them at a respectful distance. And funnily enough, we actually had to wear masks. The minute we got within a certain range of these animals, our ranger instructed us to put our masks on because respiratory illnesses are passed very easily between primates and humans because we share so much DNA. And so we had to put our masks on, pull our mosquito nets back over our faces because, of course, we're in the tropics and there are plenty of mosquitoes and creatures like sweat bees, which gravitate to you since you're sweating profusely under those climatic conditions. And so that was very, very special and something that has really stayed with me.
How many gorillas did you see in a group each time?
I think the first one, there were around 10 that we saw in the troop, probably around 4 or 5 of them at fairly close distance. The second time was particularly extraordinary because we had been hacking our way through a very dense undergrowth, and the tracker kind of parted this foliage, and there, right before us in a tree, was a silverback.
Wow.
And he kind of turned around and looked at us. And we had to keep there are very strict rules in place about the distance that you keep. But a little later, excuse me, we then saw a member of that group walk out from the bush and actually turn to look at us, and then start to dig for roots around a tree. And that was pretty extraordinary because that was a new root site. They call it a root site, where the groups dig for roots, and until then that particular site hadn't been documented. So we were seeing something quite exceptional
and up close. Wow.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd love to visit. That's an amazing kind of experience, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Very, very memorable. Yeah,
for sure.
Oh, that's brilliant. Now, another thing that I always like to talk to people about is when something goes wrong when you travel, because often that you bring back the most interesting or the most fun stories from something going wrong. It's usually not a disaster. In the end, it's usually a good story. So I would love you to tell us about a time when something went wrong on your travels.
Well, touch wood, I'm one of those people who hasn't experienced lost luggage terribly much, a couple of times, but it's been thankfully on the way home, so it hasn't been a great problem. There've been a few delayed flights. I've been involved. I was caught up in a cyclone once, but probably the most frustrating thing that ever happened to me was I was with my family in New York, my husband and 3 children who at that stage were sort of teenagers. And we'd started our journey in New York, and we were then going on to Chicago to commence our road trip following Route 66, which runs from Chicago to Los Angeles to Santa Monica. And we'd spent a few days in New York City, and we were then due to catch our flight, and we caught public transport. We hopped on a bus. We were going from LaGuardia Airport, got to the airport, and we were told that our flight had been delayed, and that we had been put on an earlier flight, but actually that we were too late to check in for that flight.
That's not very useful.
And we were not told when the next flight would be available. And I said to the woman at the check-in desk, why has our flight been delayed? And she said, Chicago's got weather.
Weather.
So that's become a bit of a trademark phrase in my family. Chicago's got weather. That's kind
it's an
of
explanation for anything bad.
It's an explanation for anything bad. And I remember being rather perturbed and thinking, well, surely everywhere has weather. That
You would
doesn't
think.
quite explain what the problem is. Anyway, as it turned out, Chicago had terrible fog, and so they were accepting some planes, but not all of them. Anyway, so we waited for 6 hours, and we were then put on a flight after 6 hours. It was tricky because we were a family of 5, so
Yes,
they
it's a
needed to
biggish
find
group.
seats
Yeah.
for all of us. And this flight was going via Cleveland. And from Cleveland, it would then be flying on to Chicago. So onto the flight, we dutifully got boarded. We landed in Cleveland late that night. Our luggage, of course, had been checked in. And we were then told that actually the onward flight had been cancelled because Chicago had weather. And we were put into a hotel without our luggage, and we were ordered to be back at the airport at 5 the next morning.
Right.
So we had a couple of hours sleep, got back to the airport next morning to find a sign saying your flight has been cancelled.
Oh, gosh. Oh, no.
We were then put onto a flight back to New York, and we were then in New York a few hours later put on a flight to Chicago. So we eventually landed in Chicago 24 hours later.
The long way round.
After a bit of a whirlwind trip. And Chicago did actually have weather. It was freezing. It was April, and it was so bitterly cold.
Right.
But I must say, it is a beautiful city, and I'm glad that we finally made it. And
I'm glad to hear that too.
And the rest of our trip went off mostly without incident. We did have a bit of a break into our car in Amarillo, Texas, but other than that, it was a wonderful journey.
Relatively smooth, and not too much weather.
Yes, not too much. In fact, the weather improved as we made our way towards Los Angeles.
Yes, as I would expect. That's excellent.
Yeah.
That sounds like a great trip as well. That's it's part of the world I'd like to explore a bit more someday. So yeah,
highly recommended.
Oh, I bet. Yeah, awesome. Speaking of exploring the world, someday we'll be able to travel again. So can you tell me a couple of places that everything crossed? Can you tell me a couple of places that you can't wait to explore once we can travel again?
Well, funnily enough, I this very week as we speak, I'm supposed to be in Birdsville in outback Queensland.
Yeah.
I was going to be doing another road trip from Charleville to Birdsville, meeting characters along the way. Finding out how people have been coping with the drought, which is something that has really fallen off our radar, given the bushfires and then coronavirus. So I was really looking forward to that trip. And I've done a lot of travel around Australia and a lot of road trips. But that's one part of the world. I've been to Charleville, but I certainly haven't been to Birdsville. So I was really looking forward to that. And I'm pretty sure that trip will go ahead at some stage. So that's something I really can't wait to do. In May, I was due to visit for the first time Ireland. I haven't been there before, funnily enough.
Oh, I love Ireland.
Yes, and I feel that I feel connected to it somehow, even though I have never visited. I have some heritage there. So, but one of the things I was planning to do was to walk the Kerry Camino, which is the section of Camino that pilgrims would walk on their way to Dingle to catch the ship to Spain.
Right.
To then go onwards to Santiago to Compostela. So I haven't walked the Camino before, but it's something that I think I would like to do.
Same.
I love that idea. I love walking, and I'm not a terribly good hiker, but I love that idea of just being able to meditate on the road, and it's that slow travel really that I think I find appealing.
Yeah, yeah.
And
the people
so
you meet along the way, and
yes,
yeah.
that's right. That's right. And it's really the antithesis of how we travel otherwise, especially of how we get to places, which
That's
is,
right.
we compress time into 15 hours or 8 hours when we get onto a plane and shoot off. So I would really still love to do that and to explore Ireland in more depth. Another place that I'm looking forward to visiting, and this is a trip that I had properly locked in, was a trip to Sudan towards the end of this year. So being from Africa, I've done quite a lot of exploration in southern and eastern Africa, a little bit in West Africa. But that part of the world, I'm very interested in, both politically and culturally. And Sudan is certainly opening up to visitors. So I do look forward to visiting sometime, maybe not this year, but hopefully sometime.
Soon. Oh,
Yes.
yes. Oh, that's a fabulous set of future travel dreams. I hope
Yeah.
they all come true. And it
Thank
has
you so
been
much.
lovely to chat to you today. So thank you so much for being part of our Grounded Travel Writer series.
Thank you for inviting me, Amanda, and happy travels to you in future too.
Thank you.